Meet the Taiwanese woman who could soon make election history. A breakthrough for Taiwan's chip-making giant and US labor unions. Halfway through the COP28 climate summit, what progress has been made? Plus, Taiwan is held up as a bastion of human rights, but a new exhibition exposes its dark past. A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Rik Glauert. When Taiwan heads to the polls next month, voters will be picking not just a new president, but also a new set of lawmakers. And for the first time, a transgender person could win a seat in the legislature. Rik Glauert reports.
As a transgender woman, Abbygail Wu has faced challenges in her family life, at school and in workplaces because of her gender identity. But she says this has only made her more determined to fight for equality for her community. And now she is going into politics.
如果你把自己也当成弱势，那你就会是永远的弱势。反而是我就是个跨性别者，那我来参选就这样，那就so what?
Wu is running as a legislator at large for Taiwan's Green Party. If her party gets enough votes in January's national elections, she will become the first openly transgender lawmaker in the country's history. Taiwan has a reputation of one of the most LGBTQ-friendly places in the region. This was the first country in Asia to legalize same-sex marriage. Taiwan has Asia's only transgender minister, Digital Minister Audrey Tang, but LGBTQ+, particularly transgender, representation in the legislature is still lacking. Transgender people like Wu often face discrimination and stigma in Taiwan. They are more likely to suffer mental health problems than the rest of society.
是让这个社群看到说，我们有人在立法院里面。那如果当他们今天不管是比如说他们在外面遇到问题，或是遇到学校的问题，他们可以跟就是欺负他们的人说，我们有朋友在立法院，你不要乱来。
Wu says it was a difficult decision to run for office and put herself in the public eye. She's running for a small political party and will face an uphill battle in her bid for a legislative seat, but remains determined.
我们国家讲的就是多元嘛，那你为什么不让立法院也变多元？
For Wu, the message is simple. The transgender people exist in Taiwan and they deserve their place in the country's halls of power. Chris Ma and Rik Glauert for TaiwanPlus.
Chip-making giant TSMC has agreed to work with local US unions, a breakthrough after months of labor disputes. In a joint statement, TSMC and a coalition of Arizona-based unions said they'll now meet regularly to discuss safety and workforce development. TSMC's also said it'll prioritize hiring locally, addressing concerns Taiwanese engineers could take US jobs. Labour issues have already delayed the chip firm's $40 billion site in North Phoenix by a year. Global chip manufacturing is quickly expanding, with Taiwan's TSMC set to build its first European factory in Germany. To brace for the big demand for talent, local educators are sparing no time getting students up to speed. Joyce Zhang has more.
Learning from the best. That's what German engineering student Niklas Weber says he's most excited about. He's been selected to study abroad in Taiwan next year for a special program all about chips.
Taiwan is the leader of semiconductor production. So it's like, obviously, if you'd like to go to a place to learn about it, Taiwan is the place to go. For me, mostly the motivation comes from the automation.
Nicholas is one of 30 students going to Taiwan next March. They're getting a full-ride scholarship plus a roughly $750 monthly stipend, paid for by the Saxony state government. The aim? To prepare the area's next generation of tech leaders.
Then they will, let's say, be part of the university education program until June in the next year, and after that they will move for 8 weeks to TSMC for practical training.
Taiwan's TSMC leads the global chips industry as the maker of almost all of the world's most advanced semiconductors, the tiny silicon pieces that power everything electronic. They've been expanding their business overseas. The latest, a $10.8 billion joint venture for a plant in eastern Germany. But while some German students are eager to learn from the leading chip maker, some Taiwanese students hope their home country can learn from Europe, particularly from their approach to work.
很多博士生他们差不多5点就准时就走了，不会像台湾，如果你可能去台湾实验室，可能很多硕博士生就是5点后还在那边做研究。我觉得从这一点可以稍微看得出来，德国人非常重视自己的生活。
Concerns are mounting over whether TSMC will be able to fill its new sites in the West. It's already butted heads with U.S. labor unions in Arizona over different working styles, a culture gap that will also be tested in Germany. Getting a taste of TSMC's way of doing things in the training phase could help ease this transition. And with the pressure of attracting thousands of local workers, TSMC may also be taking notes from students like Nicholas. Delphine Chen and Joyce Zhen for TaiwanPlus.
After a speedy start to climate talks in Dubai, negotiations at the end of the first week are at a crossroads. As Laurel Stewart reports, leaders from around the world are racing against the clock to reach an agreement on ending fossil fuels.
Global leaders have spent 7 tense days in climate talks in Dubai. The COP28 summit started off with a bang, with a deal to compensate developing countries for the impact of climate change. The fund, called Loss and Damage, already has $720 million in pledges. It's an acknowledgement by richer countries that the world's lowest emitters take the brunt of climate change. But some say it's not enough.
Loss and Damage was a win. But we're kidding ourselves if we think it's a tick in the box for finance and support at this COP. More is required.
The people that are on the front lines of the climate crisis, they need billions to address the worst impacts of this crisis, and not millions.
And after focusing on financing the effects of climate change, the summit's attention has turned to how to curb it altogether. Leaders are trying to agree on what's called the Global Stocktake, an overview of how countries plan to meet their climate goals. This includes figuring out what to do about burning fossil fuels such as coal, oil and natural gas, the key drivers of global warming. But leaders are undecided. The US and some EU countries have agreed to phase out fossil fuels.
We voted with the EU, with members of the EU, because not all the EU is in the G7, but the G7, we voted for phasing out.
But countries such as India, China and Saudi Arabia say they want to phase down fossil fuels. They've proposed using gas to transition away from coal and oil, but it's an option activists and scientists say is not a solution.
Some of those very so-called solutions that they will say we need to transition to, such as clean gas or nuclear or hydrogen, are actually just false solutions that will pave the way for more fossil fuels.
And when discussions turned to transport, the second highest emitting sector, there were plans but no promises to expand electric vehicle infrastructure. But time is running out. During the talks, the EU's Copernicus Climate Change Service reported 2023 has been the warmest year on record, almost passing the tipping point of 1.5 degrees Celsius higher than the pre-industrial average. It means lowering emissions is more crucial than ever.
At the end of next week, we need COP to deliver a bullet train to speed up climate action. We currently have an old caboose chugging over rickety tracks.
With a week left at the talks, all eyes will be on whether leaders can come together to agree on not only lowering, but eradicating fossil fuels for good. James Lin and Laurel Stewart for TaiwanPlus.
The COP28 summit aims to encourage developed nations to commit to cutting carbon emissions. But for fast-growing developing nations like Indonesia, quitting fossil fuels is not that easy. Irene Lin reports.
This is the biggest coal-fired power plant in Southeast Asia, and it's filling the air with an acrid smell. The Suralaya power plant is around 100 kilometers from the Indonesian capital, Jakarta, and it's about to get even bigger. 2 new units are coming, and locals are concerned.
Oh, khawatir banget loh, Pak. Sangat menakutkan. Saya juga pengennya mah pindah rumah ini. Pengennya mah kalau itu mah.
But there's no escaping coal in Indonesia. The country is the world's biggest coal exporter and is crucial to domestic industry too, with coal powering lucrative nickel mining, which ironically is the key to electric vehicle batteries. And even as coal falls out of fashion elsewhere in the world, it remains indispensable for this developing nation.
Kemudian batu bara sampai saat ini masih menjadi sumber energi yang paling murah ya, paling reliable dan paling accessibility dan memenuhi unsur ketahanan energi. Jadi
Indonesia's government does want to do away with coal, and a deal with the UN promises funding of $20 billion to make that happen. But there are serious challenges. Loopholes let existing plants expand. Plants that power industry rather than the grid are also exempt from downsizing. And many coal-fired power plants are fairly new. Shutting them down now means the project will lose money. Still, the impact of coal burning is hard to ignore. The Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air says emissions from Indonesia's coal plants were responsible for over 10,000 deaths in 2022 alone. And people's livelihoods suffer too.
Masyarakat Suralaya udah dari sisi kanan, sisi kiri udah terkepung dengan debu, Pak.
Indonesia's coal addiction is in the spotlight at the UN's COP28 climate conference in Dubai. Indonesia, one of the world's biggest and most populous countries, will have an important role in achieving any climate goals. The country wants 44% of its power to come from renewable sources by 2030. But with only 7 years to go, solar and wind still make up less than 1% each of Indonesia's power. And with the net zero emissions target for the power generation sector set much further away in 2050, it means the smokestacks of Indonesia's coal plants will continue polluting the skies while their generators power the nation. Dolphin Chen, John Van Trieste, and Irene Lin for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan is holding its annual Human Rights Festival this week. Ed Moon reports on one of the festival's most highly anticipated events. A dialogue in pictures between 2 photojournalists, one from Taiwan, the other from Hong Kong.
Portraits of victims of Taiwan's White Terror era. Over 4 decades of martial law in the country that saw intense political repression, only ending in the late 1980s. It's a period that saw thousands imprisoned and even killed. It's all part of a photo exhibition at this year's Human Rights Festival in Taipei, showcasing the lifetime works of late photojournalist Pan Xiaoxia. This is the first showing of Pan's work since his death in July, aged 69. He was well known in Taiwan for having captured some of the country's most important historical events on film, especially the transition from one-party rule to democracy.
感谢有一些影像工作者，特别是摄影家他们透过在第一现场见证，或者说长期的这样子的记录，所以即使历史被磨灭了，或是被扭曲了透过他们的影像，我们都可以重建。
Sitting alongside Pan's work is that of Hong Kong photojournalist Goh Zongming. While Pan's work focuses on Taiwan's civil movements of the 1980s and 90s, Koala tackles the past decade of the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong, including the dramatic protests of 2019. Although their works focus on different eras, Koala says he and Pan have much in common.
原来我们拍的东西也很接近，好像是一些关于政治事件啊，关于游民啊，一些社会议题啊，女性议题啊。 原来我跟潘老师都有拍过，都很关心，所以原来不同年代都可以做一个对照。
After 30 years of democracy, Taiwan is still coming to terms with its own history of political repression. While in Hong Kong, such a reckoning seems unlikely to happen anytime soon, as the territory continues to adjust to a draconian national security law that's put hundreds in jail. But these images serve as a powerful reminder that long after the streets are cleared, the struggle for freedom is not so easily forgotten. Devon Tsai, Karma Xu, Eugene Huang, and Ed Moon for TaiwanPlus.
An assault on the senses, the high-tech musical that puts the audience in the middle of the action. Coming up next.
We bring you stories from Taiwan.
Every day of the week.
Our reporters travel the nation.
Exploring the issues that matter to you.
News from here in Taiwan and around the world.
What's up, Taiwan? On TaiwanPlus.
Welcome back. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. Leaders from the EU and China are holding talks to address deep divisions over trade and the war in Ukraine. The summit in Beijing is the first of its kind in 4 years and comes at a time of increased tension. The EU is accusing Chinese firms of helping Russia evade Western sanctions, while China wants the EU to end an investigation into Chinese subsidies for electric cars. The talks also come a day after EU member Italy said it'll pull out of China's flagship Belt and Road Trade Initiative. EU officials told Reuters news agency they don't expect the summit to produce any concrete outcomes. For more, our reporter Stash Butler spoke to EU-China scholar Zsuzsa Anna Ferenczi.
If we're going into this summit already expecting that nothing, concrete is going to come out of it, why hold a summit at all?
It is important to hold a summit and to keep channels of communication open in order to keep trying to get the message across. Whether the message gets across does not really depend on China as much as it depends on us and how consistent we are with our messaging. It's really thanks to China to a great extent that we are able to move closer together because we are frustrated on the European side with how little China has done to address our grievances.
Do you think that the EU has understood China's concerns?
That's a good question. What are China's concerns? Because what we've seen coming out of China is a very assertive approach. I fail to see how the two sides can actually converge having such different language and such different expectations from each other. So I believe that the European side has been trying to adjust and recalibrate its approach. I fail to see how China is rethinking its approach towards Europe. And I completely fail to see how China has understood how important the Ukraine issue is for Europeans. So not only does China not play a constructive role in that sense, but China has been refusing to even talk about it.
You mentioned how Ukraine is one of, obviously, the major grievances the EU has in this relationship. How big of a role will Taiwan play in these talks?
Taiwan remains a difficult issue to discuss with China because China refuses any dialogue on issues that it considers of core national interest. Given how different the two positions are, I don't expect Taiwan to really be prominent on the agenda, but I do expect for the European side to maintain that position that Taiwan is important, that strategically speaking, the EU needs to take into consideration the impact of tension growing in the Indo-Pacific.
That was Zsuzsa Anna Ferenczi from National Donghua University speaking to Stash Butler. The United States says it is closely monitoring reports of Chinese warships docked at the Ream Naval Base in Cambodia. Cambodian Defense Minister T. Sea says China's Navy was visiting the Southeast Asian nation to help train the Cambodian military. It follows reports that Beijing and Phnom Penh signed a deal in 2019, giving China exclusive access to parts of the base. The US says it has serious concerns about China's plans to control the base. Cambodia says it hasn't given any country exclusive access to the facility. Israeli troops are fighting Hamas as they expand an offensive into southern Gaza. Tens of thousands of displaced Palestinian civilians are seeking shelter in Rafah, a city close to Gaza's border with Egypt. But many fear they won't be safe there either. Hamas launched a surprise attack on Israel 2 months ago. Israel has responded by bombarding Gaza. The enclave's health ministry says more than 16,000 Palestinians have been killed. The UN Secretary General is warning the Security Council of an impending humanitarian crisis from the war in Gaza.
The Secretary General urges the members of the Security Council to press to avert a humanitarian catastrophe, and he appeals for a humanitarian ceasefire to be declared.
Ukraine has given the US a list of weapons it says are needed to repel Russian invaders. Kiev asked for fighter jets, drones, helicopters and advanced missile defense systems at a closed-door conference in Washington. It comes as the US Senate blocks an aid package for the country, possibly ending US funding for its war effort. The United States has provided Ukraine with over $100 billion since Russia launched its full-scale invasion last year. Australia's dwindling koala population is facing a new blow. John Van Trieste has more.
A koala finds a comfortable perch in a eucalyptus tree. It's a deeply Australian scene, but one that's increasingly rare. Here in the state of New South Wales, koalas have been declared endangered. Some estimates say they could disappear from the wild by 2050. And this isn't the only part of Australia where they're in trouble. 500 kilometers north of Sydney, plans are underway to take action. Over 3,000 square kilometers of public forest and national park land are set to merge into a new national park, Great Koala National Park. But that won't happen until 2025 at the earliest. And in the meantime, the rush is on to profit before logging is banned.
There's been a massive expansion and intensification of logging in some of the most biodiverse areas of the Great Koala National Park. There is an intent behind that to grab the resources whilst they still can.
The state government has responded. It says it stopped logging in over 100 koala hotspots on state land in September alone. But these cover just under 5% of the proposed national park. And officials say that while they want to move quickly, rushing the national park is out of the question.
The real issue here is how can we do it as quickly as possible? How can we work with people? We weren't just going to press a stop altogether straight away and without any plan for what happens with those communities and without a proper assessment of the forests.
And so logging continues. The timber industry argues this isn't a bad thing. Industry leaders say they employ 9,000 people in New South Wales and operate to high environmental standards. They say it's possible to have both logging and sustainable forests, and that a ban would just lead people to buy wood from less strictly governed parts of the world.
If we were to lose our native forestry industry in New South Wales, we're really just pushing the supply of that timber overseas to other jurisdictions where they have much weaker environmental standards, where we're seeing a lot more rapid degradation of those environments and a greater impact on threatened species in other jurisdictions.
But environmentalists sharply disagree. They want a total ban and more.
My greatest aspiration is that all the forests across the Great Koala National Park are immediately protected from logging.
What ends up happening will be critical. The proposed park is home to 15% of New South Wales' declining koala population. And logging is set to ramp up even further. If the park isn't created fast enough, it could spell trouble for these iconic animals. John Su and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
A theatre group in New Taipei is combining traditional performance with modern technology to bring old stories to new audiences. Rhys Ayers was there to check out their act.
Leaping, flipping, and singing among the crowd. This technological Taiwanese musical smashes through the fourth wall and puts the audience right in the middle of the action. This is Flying Goddess, a new immersive theatre experience that tells traditional Chinese legends through a mix of mediums, including 360-degree projections that transform the theatre into a living, breathing world. But performing alongside virtual characters brings new challenges to the actors.
期待当然是因为像这样子沉浸式，然后我们到这空间里面，我们可能对于画面，然后跟舞台上一定会是完全不一样的。那我们会重新在里面做调配跟设计。
By interacting with the elaborate animations, the cast bring to life mythical beasts from Chinese folklore and recount epic tales of love and war. One story even warns of the disastrous effects humans are having on the planet. Bringing together a range of performance elements and integrating them with technology was core to director Wu Xingguo's vision.
但是我们有太多好的作品在全世界演过，那么有我们很多丰富的经验，然后我们把这一些整个集合起来放在一个科技里面，我觉得这个创举是未来的。
The team behind Flying Goddess are hopeful that performances like theirs can attract people young and old, and inspire a new kind of theatre that makes the audience a part of the story. Klein Wang and Rhys Ayres for TaiwanPlus.
Thank you for watching TaiwanPlus News. Finally today, we'll leave you with these shots of a life-size chocolate Willy Wonka statue in London. I'm Ian Kavat. Take care and see you next time.